Well, good evening again, everybody, and welcome back to the Ministry of Psychic Weather. Fiona is not with us tonight. She's doing family stuff, so it's just the three usuals, myself, Olivia, and Tina, and we have a guest tonight, a special guest. It's Jason Heppenstall, a man I have a lot of respect for and for his work, and I consider him a friend. And we've known each other for a while, and Jason is a very good author, and he's probably in the same kind of field as guess myself in terms of like alternative folklores and how the world is developing, and along with like everything else. A few years ago, he did a fantastic presentation on the folklore of places like Greenland and Scandinavia. It's on YouTube if you look it up, and he's written some excellent books. One of them, it's The Road to Odin's Lake. About he's very well versed in everything Scandinavian and travel and things like that. And he's interested in a lot of the same things that we're all interested in, from the Fortean to mythology and everything else. So welcome, Jason. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be on, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
So this week, I don't know if you've seen the show before, but generally we try to like talk about this kind of like psychic zeitgeist of the day. And the topics do drift. We do bring in other things. So it's like it's not a very hard and fast format. But in the next hour, we generally, the basic thing is that. Now, I have noticed something online, and it's quite interesting how there's a proliferation of videos, and they're showing up all over the place now in America, in the UK, everywhere, Canada, Australia. And there are people talking about how humans have changed. They're not the same anymore. And it's almost like becoming very apparent to them right now. I think many of us have noticed it for a while, certainly since lockdown days. But it's almost like the kind of people that wouldn't notice it. Some of these are actually quite religious groups, like Christian, vloggers and stuff like that, and they're quite upset and turned and bothered by it. And I just want to know why suddenly, what's is it the oncoming of winter or something? But there just seems to be these things don't manifest all at the same time for no reason. Does anyone have any feelings about that? We'll let Jason go first.
Well, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I saw, was it Elon Musk made a video the other day saying that exact thing? Um, and what you're finding is people don't have any kind of sense of irony or a sense of humor, or they can't think in an abstract way. I mean, I'm sort of Generation X, and we sort of grew up being we could be quite jokey and ironic and that sort of thing and speak with a lot of nuance. And what you're finding now is people seem to have lost that. They just seem to be more and more sort of humorless, as though there's something, a component that's missing from within them. And I find myself having to curtail my speech these days, because people just don't react in the way that they used to. But it's not just that. Whenever they roll out the latest bad idea, whether it's like, digital IDs or some sort of new jab that does something to your body that's never been tested, you would think that the majority would be cautious. And yet most people just seem to pile straight into it without questioning. It's almost as though they are, sort of they've lost their free will to a certain extent.
Yeah, like a cultural autism or a cultural Asperger's. I've noticed that too. Tina or Olivia, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have just not necessarily given up, but I think that a lot of them have come to the realization, albeit on a subconscious level, that there never really was much in there to begin with. And in that sense that they have given up, there is no resistance anymore to no discernment, no nothing much of a person in there anymore. And I was talking about this a while back on my own videos, like, is the NPC even a human? Were they ever a human? I don't know.
Yes, I've noticed the same thing, and I've been noticing it for quite some time, but it's been ramping up a lot lately. And it seems like everyone's just going through the motions, more or less. and they're functioning, but it's all on a very surface level, and you look in their eyes and you don't really see much. You don't really see a spark. You don't really get any. I mentioned this in an earlier episode. You don't even get much of an energetic signature off of them. It's like they're kind of hollow, or like a hologram or something.
There's a huge issue there. I was like the other day I saw this. There's this social media group where they post like strange maps, and one of the maps was Europe, and it says people on in Europe who live on islands, percentage of the population, and of course the UK, well Britain and Ireland were 100% because we both live on islands, and Iceland was 100%. And I made a joke saying, well, it's really a lot more if you count, as a kind of like I thought it was just an obvious joke. And I said, well, it's actually more than 100% if you count the people who live on islands on off the coast of those islands. It's just like just a kind of silly joke that meant nothing. Uh, what are you talking about? It was like a hostile. It was like Mr. Spock, with PMS.
Yeah, you get the kind of thousand-yard stare and the sort of suspicious look sometimes. Like, are you trying to pull one over on me? With your humor, sort of thing.
Your humor.
What is this strange magic that you're using?
That is strange though that you, on one hand, because I've been following up on the UK and what is happening there, that on one hand, I see so many angry people and they're really angry and they have good reason to be angry. And there seems to be this fire burning in the underbelly there. And at the same time, you have the complete opposite of that. The apathy, the emptiness, like Olivia said, the hollow shell, and they're completely antithetical to one another.
And they don't know why
Yeah,
they're angry.
absolutely. Sorry, Thomas.
No, it's okay. Just that they don't know why they're angry. They can't explain it. A lot of it is almost like it's almost like toddler rage. Toddlers get like, well, Tina, you know this now. A little younger children can get angry out of a kind of a frustration of it, but they can't verbalize it or really what's making them annoyed, the tantrums. Well, I'm meeting adults like that now. They don't know why they're angry.
Yeah, that's exactly it, I think. I mean, I live in the UK, seeing what's going on here. And I think a part of it is the cognitive dissonance. People, people are told all the time that, the things are okay. If you turn on the television, there's all, like dancing shows and quiz games and all the rest of it. But at the same time, sort of, in the basement of their minds, they've got all these kind of creatures lurking and coming to the fore, which they've tried to suppress. I mean, if you look at the news is just universally bad all the time now in Britain. It's just, we've got these politicians that I wouldn't even say they rule over us. They're just kind of like managing us as though we are kind of workers in a factory or something. They don't lead at all. We've got all these problems with the economy, with immigration problems and crime and all the rest of it. Um, People are fearful. They don't want to talk about certain things. And if you do bring it up, they can be quite reactive. So I think it is the cognitive dissonance and the fear kind of coming to the surface in a lot of people. That's what's making them so jittery and certain people very, very angry as well.
Do you have the feeling as if this is going somewhere, as if there's an end goal to the government managing the people, or do you think that they just don't know what to do either?
Well,
There's almost a sense. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say that people always used to sort of give the government the benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, they made a mistake with this policy or whatever. But now I think people are starting to wake up to realize it's not a mistake. It's all been planned.
Yeah. There's
Mm.
also a sense of I get it very much. Like you hear there's lots of cliches about the Kali Yuga and Ragnarok and all these end time, well, all these changes and cycles. I feel that extremely strongly. Like that we're literally, entering into the end of the spiral and going to fly out the like a black, almost like a societal black hole or a cultural or I don't know, it's like a psychological, psychic black hole, and we're going to blow out the other side. And I think they do too, but they don't have because they're not a bunch of like misfits like we are who've dived into this alternative way of living and thinking. They don't have the language to articulate it, I don't think, but they know. I remember like I wrote an article about it years ago. I remember reading or hearing it was actually a radio broadcast I'd heard years ago of an Irish diplomat that was in Danzig in the 1930s, just before the Nazis had the Third Reich had invaded Poland, and he was like what he described was kind of like today. He was saying that like the he was writing letters back from the embassy or wherever the diplomatic attaché or whatever, saying that society's breaking down here. There's rapes constantly, murders constantly. The people have lost. They're not taking care of their children. Fathers are walking out on their families. And he was describing the sort of Renfielding, this Danzig effect that was they just knew that they were going to be destroyed. They just knew, unspeakable horrors were going to come both from the Third Reich and from the Bolsheviks in the war. And I think we're seeing that now all around us. Even I even see it like on the roads. People drive like maniacs now.
They walk like maniacs even. I've never been, bumping into so many people despite being attentive, but they just bump into you. They just they walk. I mean, it's a German thing. I hate to say it. I kind of hate it, but it's kind of true. Germans, they just won't go out of the way ever. You just have to go out of the way. If one person goes here, the other goes here. One of them happens to be German. That's it. I don't know why that is. I'm not. I just don't know why. But now it's so much worse because it feels like they're genuinely uncoordinated and so inattentive, like you know, somewhere in the clouds. And it's amazing, really, how blind some people are. A lot of people, way, way more than usual. It's not the usual German thing. It's something on top of that.
Yeah, these videos I've been watching, and a lot, like I said, quite a few of them are like Christian guys in America. They said exactly that. They noticed the zombie apocalypse, that there was a zombification of the population. And they were like saying things like we shouldn't hate them, we should pray for them, and all this stuff. But it was very interesting how they had observed, like in Middle America, exactly what you're seeing in Germany.
Funny because
Yeah.
I live in Italy and they are known to be very chaotic people. And in my experience, that has not happened. And I don't live in a city, but I do go to cities with relative frequency, and it's not happening there, weirdly enough. The
I
bumping
I
think
think it
into
that
each
depends.
other,
I think there's
the
another
zombification
component.
is less.
Yes, I think
Sorry.
there's no, I'm sorry. I think there's another component to it, because I think there's also the cognitive dissonance factor that you've already mentioned here. But there's another thing which has to do with mentality, which is why I think it's so important and interesting what you just said, Tina, about the Italians, because Italians don't really hold back. I mean, we all know that Italians are gonna say whatever they have to say to your face. But in my country, it's totally different. I'm originally not from Germany, so it's different there too. But in Germany, it's like they do hold back a lot, and there's this German word verklemmt, which means uptight, repressed, something like that. And that is very, very much the case here. And I believe that this is another factor that plays into it because people here, and probably in a lot of Scandinavian countries as well, I guess, maybe in the UK as well, I'm not sure, but there is a mentality there where people are terribly frightened of drawing attention to them, negative attention. So they do not want their peers to disapprove of them. So they're
Mm.
terrified of saying the wrong thing, of laughing too loud, of dressing too colorful. Whenever I don't dress in beige and black, everyone's like, you know, like
Mm.
what, why, but so this is another component of a mentality thing in more like repressed countries, I think.
It can change
Mm.
though, because the Irish used to be like the Italians up until quite recently. They didn't give a shit. And I remember like back in the day, I'd be going to Scandinavia, places like Oslo and Stockholm. I'd get back home and I'd literally kiss the ground. Like it's great to be among like lunatics again. Life is some, but the Irish are not like that now. You might as the Irish, you might as well be living in Scandinavia. They've become totally conformist and they have that like anal retentive thing that Olivia mentioned. It's weird. It's truly weird how it's changed. I don't know if in Cornwall if it happened down where you are, Jason.
Yeah, well, I'm probably far enough away from everything for that not to have reached here yet. But I do have to go to London for work fairly often, and I notice it when I'm there. I mean, people in London they're basically drones now. They walk around looking at their phones all the time, the same as any other like globalized city. You know, they're all sort of wearing the same kind of clothes. They're looking at their phones. They're not looking where they're going. They're all walking around with a cup of coffee in hand, um, and it's kind of lost its soul, in a way.
Yeah,
But that's just in the big cities. Certainly where I am out west, it's still chaotic and you know,
that's good.
people are people, shall we say? It's funny because there's some people in the town I live in, Penzance, is sort of famous for being a kind of a hotbed of drunkenness
Pirates.
and revelry and pirates and all that sort of stuff. And there's been attempts recently to gentrify it. And then you see people walking around with like MAGA hats on, but it says "Make Penzance Penzance again."
How long may
Are
that
you
continue?
turn it back?
Yeah, I mean,
That thing about all dressing the same, that is
Mhm.
something that I've noticed in Italy a lot, in spite of their very colorful personalities, which they do have, is that especially the young girls, the teenage girls, all dress the exact same without exception. I see no young girls in dresses ever. There are booty shorts and crop tops across the board. Wherever you are in Italy, and you see a teenage girl, she's wearing that during summer and nothing else. And I don't understand that. I don't.
Mm.
maybe that's not boding well for the future. Maybe that's the beginning of the change, maybe that's the beginning of the kind of globalization of Italians. I'm just saying, I hope it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I
Maybe,
went
but I
to.
have to say that Italy so far has proven extremely resilient against globalization. It's,
That's
I
right.
don't know how else to say it. Like at every step, there is resistance. Italy, I think, is the only EU country that banned lab grown meat. For instance, I don't know if you heard this, but Campbell's Soup recently had a scandal happening that they put 3D printed chicken in their soups and you didn't know it.
I just
Wow.
saw that on the news earlier today.
Yeah. Mm, mm.
I was going to say that I was in earlier this year. I was in India, and I think along with Italy, India is another place that really resists globalization. But it's been a long time since I was in India. But now you've got this big middle class emerging there, and of course, they're all wearing the sort of global brands, and they're obsessed with Instagram and taking selfies. There's even like wherever you go, there's like walls with signs on them saying, no selfies, and there's like security guards stood around with sticks, to keep them away. It's like hordes of Instagram sort of influencers everywhere you look. But generally speaking, like the whole, they're a very small minority. The rest of the culture, they're still wearing their, Indian clothes and eating their Indian food. And as a Westerner, you certainly feel like you're very far away from home there, which is a good thing, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that is still again about the Instagram thing. It's social media is obviously their tool they're using to brainwash to zombify everyone as many as possible before whatever is going to happen is ever going to happen. It's funny. There's also kind of a spiritual component to it as well. Like it's not just like panic in a kind of a psychological way. There's almost like a spiritual panic. You see, th like you see, you know that opening monologue of Nigel Neal's Quatermass 4, where he says like the world had fallen into chaos, as if some primal force was reasserting itself in the world. That's probably how I would actually feel about what's really going on. And you see it like I was reading things there about the huge numbers of people turning to Catholicism. Uh, in Protestant countries and stuff like that. I'm finding that like I want, and there hasn't been any kind of crusade by the Catholic Church. It's almost like part of this it's almost like this part of this like panic. We better find the right God before it goes all to shit. It almost feels like that.
Do you think that it's what Oswald Spengler called it the second religiosity? When
Yeah,
your
Spengler,
when
yeah.
your society starts to crumble, people rush in a panic back to safety, what they know. Um, in this case, Christianity could be
And that's
something to do
exactly
with
what happened to pagan Rome. Towards before the empire, the pagan empire fell apart. They had this like mad rush towards the temples again, and all these new sort of like cults, like and the government took control of it. Things like Sol Invictus and this kind of thing, and the this Manibus cults, and they were all basically turbocharged, very orthodox versions of Roman, Latin paganism. So that's what's happening. Yeah, Spengler was bang on about that. This is almost like what did he say? The final religiosity or something. The last refuge
it.
of the last refuge of a scoundrel is prayer. Well, that's it on a societal level.
I saw something, I think it was yesterday on YouTube, about people in America converting to either, I don't know, Catholicism or going back to the church in droves. And there is a guy who developed an AI model that talks to people, in the form of Jesus. So they can chat with Jesus. And what I found absolutely hilarious is you get Jesus with the free version of the app, but with the paid version, you can also chat to Satan. I thought that was so hilarious. And the developer is planning on introducing different biblical characters, including different saints and maybe an archangel or something into the fold. And I was like, oh my goodness.
That's
You'd have
that's
There's
to pay
definitely
me
going
to
to make
chat with
those
Jesus.
psychoses better.
there's an article I
Yeah.
read today that the next generation of computers will be plasma, and they will be plasma using quantum motherboards. So ostensibly, they're actually creating real life now. Those ones that computers aren't like alive. Well, give it time. They're coming. It's when these have these plasmatic mainframes. Great name for a band. They will literally have a life form.
Yes, and something else that was
Mm.
really frightening that I saw also yesterday was about an actual NASA program. It is legit. They've been doing it since 1993, and they're generating microscopic nano fog. And those fog particles are called foglets. And the foglets can accumulate in such a way that they basically, as I understood it, it basically creates a false reality. So, and they can also enter into the lungs, of course, but also into the brain. And that's where the human body can become an interface, and they can reconstruct your thoughts or something. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but the whole thing has been started in 1993, and apparently they're doing it. They have a plan. So
Wow.
yeah.
I remember, funny you mentioned 1993 because I remember that there was an article going around, actually in The Guardian, that said in 1993, somebody somewhere, I can't remember where, probably in the US, they injected mice with mRNA technology, and it went these protein spikes went into their blood, and then they were able to control their minds. And they had mice going around mazes, and they were controlling them with joysticks. And you can't find that article anywhere now, but it did exist about, well, 5 years ago, shall we say?
I think
But that,
that's what the
yeah.
And those mice, did they have any side effects, or
Well, I
I
don't
mean,
know. I
was
assume
there
that
anything
they
in
were
the article
experimental
about?
mice, so
they
they
could
probably
Yeah,
died.
they could have got cancers or
yeah.
anything, and they just said,
Mm.
"Who gives a shit?" You know, the control part worked. That'd be enough for them. They wouldn't care about like everything else. Would be just like collateral to them.
Mm.
That's yeah, that's sick. But that like that's what I think this whole Epstein thing is really about. I think the whole thing with the teenage girls is a cover story for basically these kind of nanotech bioweapons were being developed, and he was some kind of fixer for that world. This is why you have, and it turns out you have people like Noam Chomsky now receiving huge amounts of money off him. And this is the now remember Chomsky was well, I grew up with Chomsky being Mr. Freedom, the darling of the liberals. And
Mm.
I mean, even everybody really to a certain extent in terms of his like his whole thing of like government control. And then when the Needlecraft comes out, he's on TV saying you better take it or not, or else. You know, we got a real insight into, it's almost like this when you think about this, like this mRNA is almost like a kind of a biotech communism, ultimate compliance, like Maoism in a syringe.
Yeah, it's ironic that his most famous book is called Manufacturing Consent.
Any
Yeah.
manufacturing consent.
And who ran to get it? Exactly the type of person who is terrified of being labeled a conspiracy theorist or anything non-conformist by their peers. It's exactly that type of person that dresses in beige and black just so the neighbors won't stare, etc., etc.
At the same time, too, I know some pretty cool people who got it out of terror of losing their jobs and get like the propaganda really worked on them, and maybe their wives or their girlfriends said, "Look, it's okay to have principles. What are the kids going to do?" That kind of thing. And I have genuine sympathy for those people. I don't consider, you know what I mean? I don't consider them weak or anything, but I mean, they were just trying to do what they thought was right for their families. But and they're now having to, and a lot of them now would have to be living with the burden of knowing that they did probably endanger themselves somehow. So I would never like say anything negative against them. They were not the ones, and once they weren't trying to like mandate the rest of us, they were the only ones I have a big problem with. But yeah, so it's like, yeah, they say it's a test. Yeah, sure, it was a test, was it? In some ways, but it's as I've got further away from those awful days, I find myself being a lot more sympathetic towards people who are genuinely tricked, but more angry at the ones who were very fanatical about it and vicious and bullying about it. So I've gone like into two extremes at the same time.
Yeah, so I was watching recently a program from the 1980s that some of you, if you're old enough, might have heard of it. It's called Brideshead Revisited, and it was a TV program set in the 1920s and the 1930s in a kind of an aristocratic setting in England between the wars. Um, and throughout the whole series, because it's like an 11-hour series, the the main family in it are sort of devout Catholics, and they are talking an awful lot about this state of grace. And I was brought up in a kind of a non-religious setting, and I've heard lots of people, talking about the state of grace before God before, and it never really sunk in, like, what are they really talking about? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this the state of grace is kind of a being on your best behavior and doing all the right things, like confession and living in the right manner, worshipping, all the rest of it before God. And then I thought, well, I wonder if there's a modern secular equivalent of that. And it got me thinking that, with the decline of sort of the Abrahamic religions and Christianity in particular, people are sort of, they're still religious, but they just don't realize it anymore. And what they really are worshipping is a kind of this kind of techno god of progress and science and all the rest of it. Um, and this, you know, god of progress, we might as well call him, used to deliver a lot of good stuff to us, like, you know, airplanes and high-speed trains and computers and everything. But with each passing year, it's been less and less, and it's turned now, where, you know, now we get you know, electronic smog and pollution and all these like sort of gene altering technologies, etc., etc., etc. And yet the people still want to sort of live in this kind of state of grace. So it got me thinking, you know, why are you know, the people who are kind of genuflecting before this god, it's almost like the Aztecs. You know, this god is starting to demand human sacrifices. And you see people who are quite willing to sacrifice themselves these days for, you know, whatever cause, whether it's some sort of, you know, new technology. You know, we all know the profile pictures that put on social people put on social media, or, you know, they're quite happy to be with the idea of being sent off to a war to die for some kind of uh, sort of nebulous reason that they don't really understand. Um, you know, it's like, you know, meet the new God, same as the old God.
Which the ultimate sacrifice is Western civilization, because in the rush to become so progressive and move on forward, while at the same time, in terms of actual tangible technology that's useful to people, nothing has been invented since the 60s, probably. It's all just miniaturization of what's come before. That now the progress represents the self deprecation of Western civilization to rather than saying, okay, we were amazing because we were born into this, you know, this resource-rich part of the world that was harsh, and we had to abide by natural law, which is so central to ancient Greek and Rome. And that brought us through everything into the Industrial Revolution and to the phenomenal standard of living that we developed in the West compared to everywhere else. Now, because actual tangible progress has stopped in terms of technology, a kind of a Frankenstein philosophical idea of attacking progress, attacking Western civilization. It's almost like the monster that eats itself. We have to be progressive. There's nothing new technology. Okay, progressive will destroy Western civilization. That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's because, you know, the God of progress is the God of infinite progress. And, you know, to progress towards towards infinity obviously goes against natural law. So what you end up with is actually a situation, you know, kind of an Ouroboros type situation where you start eating your own tail. I think we might be seeing that now with Western civilization.
Yes, and there's also an outright, yeah, hatred of the past, I've noticed. With many, for example, Instagram accounts. It's also a kind of cognitive dissonance thing, I think, with especially those younger, or let's say millennials and younger creators who, for example, some makeup artist who loves recreating vintage, 40s, 50s, 60s makeup and hair. And I mean, you could say, oh, that's just trivial nonsense and fluff. But no, it's not, because even something so, superficial, such as fashion and hairstyles, reflects something and has a psychological meaning in this case, because there is this clear distinction between liking vintage aesthetics, but being completely opposed to pretty much any and everything that our grandparents and great grandparents wanted. And this, of course, throws the baby out with the bathwater, because while certain things are questionable or no longer feasible for today naturally, there are things and values that might still be very, very beneficial and also healthy for people psychologically healthy and financially healthy and in any way you can imagine healthy, but they're being thrown out. And I've read quite a lot of statements, for example, Instagram bios that say vintage aesthetics, not vintage values. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Why don't you just say you're a ultra feminist, something like that, because that's what it boils down to. Every woman in the past is a groomed child bride, and every man is a horrible, abusive monster, and everything was awful, and it's just terrible. It's just that is cognitive dissonance, par excellence. It's quite sad, really.
Yeah, I mean, in the
They
progressive
are
mindset,
Schrodinger's feminists, Olivia.
Schrodinger's
They are
feminist.
both strong, independent women and victims at the same time. You don't know which one you're gonna get, depending on the circumstances.
And that ties in with the feminization of society as well. It's because, I mean, I'm going to sound terribly sexist now, I probably shouldn't have said that. But there is, society has become just like what, Schroeder said, it's behave. You don't know which, you don't know, you wake up in the morning and you don't know which civilization you're going to get. A version of Western civilization you're going to get.
Yeah, and I think there was a case a few years ago, if I remember, where there was a couple in, it might have been Seattle or somewhere like that, and they decided to live as Victorians. And they did at their house in a kind of Victorian way. They got all this old stuff off eBay or whatever. And they just lived, simple, happy lives without mobile phones. And they became quite famous. And then they started getting death threats. And they got so many threats against themselves because people were assuming that they were, they dared to not be progressive. They were saying,
Yeah.
that they were turning back the clock, going back to a primeval age where everybody was evil because the religion of progressiveness implies that we're moving towards a state of, good away from a state of evil. And I think in the end they had to like up sticks and move somewhere else.
That mentality is literally epidemic in Ireland. If anyone says, the country is not the same country it used to be, you'll immediately get these kind of like liberal types saying things. Oh, do you want to go back to when the church ruled everything and everyone was like had no money and stuff like that? They immediately go assume that there's a sinister objective with wanting to maintain what was good in the past. You know, uh, all you have to do is look at video footage or film footage of Irish kids in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and compare them to videos you see of them now. It's a different species. And there's obviously something has been lost. But if you say, you know, why has this gone wrong? Can we try and get back to that somehow? Immediately you're seen as somebody who's basically got a political agenda to undo the god of progress. This thing that progress must happen like you see it in the IT and the whole AI crowd, the tech people. Well, AI will probably destroy us, but we have to do it because it's progress.
Yeah. To save our civilization, we have to destroy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned the Aztecs earlier on, because towards the end of the Aztec Empire, they were consumed with a prophecy that someone was going to come from across the sea and hold them accountable for what they've done and bring down the empire. And it absolutely did happen, almost like they manifested it with the conquistadors. Don't And now we have the same thing in Western society with the aliens and disclosure and spaceships and all this stuff coming. It's everywhere in the mainstream now, and I think it comes from the same place. This kind of almost like this prophetic subconscious desire to be destroyed.
Yes, and also a total lack of discernment. I mean, if you watch a video of, let's say, 50s, 60s, 70s life and people dressed in nice, colorful outfits and women wearing makeup and short skirts, but still not looking, still looking elegant or if you want, decent. I mean, I'm not a moral police or whatever, but it is still it didn't have this kind of cheap aura to it, the way women dressed let's say in the 60s, despite super short skirts and whatnot, there was still something kind of innocent about it. I don't know how to say it. Maybe some people are gonna
Mm.
totally disagree with that, but anyway, there was more color.
Mm.
There was some sort of joie de vivre, you know, with this
Mm.
ridiculous big hair, and it was awesome. It was great because I mean, who has the time today? Who would even do that? But
Yeah.
there's something about it that is just so not taking yourself so seriously, and everybody looked like that. So you could say, yeah, well, humans are always going to want to look like each other, and there is something about that. But still, there was more color in the world, more smiles, no proliferation of obesity and stuff like that. So yeah, you and then you get the cynics as soon as you say something like, "Oh, it was so nice back then," and it seems like we lost something today because everybody is, you know, in gray and stuff like that. And as soon as somebody comments that, I guarantee there is at least one person, a cynical comment that says, "Oh, so you want to go back to segregation
Mm.
and you want to go
Mm.
back to women not having any rights and men coming home from work and beating them." Like, what? Did every man come home and beat his wife? Hello?
Mm.
What's going on? You know, just because they have some anecdotal stories in their family, or this stuff happens throughout history. It happens now, it happened then, but don't go picking out the worst of the worst and say that that is all that there was. I mean, that's just not true.
That's all that's in them. You know, like it really is. That is all that's in them. That's all that they can see. But they cannot see the beauty because it's not in them. And why that is, I don't really know. Maybe that harkens back to the NPC phenomena. Maybe they killed it themselves. Even what Thomas said, like the wish to self-destroy starts with yourself before anything else. Huh?
Yeah, I think, in a lot of cases as well, it's a lack of self-respect. I mean, you remember those
Yeah.
pictures from the Great Depression of all the men, queuing up for work in America, and they're all wearing suits, you know, hats, even though they're penniless. And that's the one thing that they own, and they try to make themselves look respectable just to sort of, get them through the day, and also, to improve their chances of getting a job. But it was a totally different time, I think. I mean, now people just dress in, well, whatever, like sweatpants and, you know,
Yeah, in the West in the 50s, even in their poor places, the women were dressed like Grace Kelly because they had singer-song machines and they could buy pattern books and they could buy cheap fabric and they could make Grace Kelly's dress
mm,
on the living room, on the dining room table. That's another aspect of something, the complete loss of actual practical skills.
Yeah, what Jason said about the men all wearing their suits. And you could see that they took a lot of pride in those suits and they treated those suits very well. And there is a sort of modern equivalent to that now, but people buying brands. And you can see this woman completely disheveled. You can see she does not take good care of herself. Her hair is greasy, it's not combed. I mean, the makeup on her face might have well been shot on there with a makeup gun. But she has her Louis Vuitton bag. She has a Hermes. Her sneakers are falling apart, but she has that Hermes hanging on her arm. That's absolutely ridiculous. It looks bad.
yeah. I think it's encouraging that we're seeing a bit of a resurgence, especially among young people, of learning these like kind of old skills, how to make your own clothes. Um, young people not, putting their phone down and getting a paper pad and a pen and writing. Well, it's quite a big thing now, I believe. I know it's probably even got a name. I don't know what the name of it is, but it's certainly like a kind of retro, sort of going back to a more analog time, and also, like with buying records and things like that. Certainly my daughter is very much into like vinyl records
Vinyl,
and
yeah.
even even she's like making her own clothes now. She's 22.
Good. And there'll always be someone who'll say, "Oh, you're using a sewing machine. That's what happened in Germany in the 30s."
Yeah,
Those types,
yeah, sewing the sort of SS insignia onto her dress.
Yeah, I saw something the other day. Lenny Henry. I don't know if Tina and Olivia know him. He's this completely unfunny English comedian who's had like an incredible career for reasons I've never understood. But he's a black guy, and he often makes he always his whole thing is like r telling racist jokes is wrong, blah blah blah. And he was until Irish television caught him telling an Irish joke years ago and played it for him, and then showed up what a phony he was. But he has this whole thing that like every single person who grew up in Britain, and you see this, Jason, I've seen this myself in the UK, that these people in either celebrities or well-off types think that every single person that grew up in England in the past at the height of the empire lived like Brideshead Revisited. That there
Yeah,
was no coal miners in Wales or tin miners in Cornwall or mill workers in Lancashire and Yorkshire. There was no shipbuilders in Belfast or in Glasgow or the Tyneside. Everyone was well off drinking tea, eating cucumber sandwiches and playing croquet. And it's just, and so therefore there has to be repatriations for what was done by the victims of the empire. Now, I can remember going to visit my cousins who lived in Birmingham. You know, you're from Birmingham. Sparkbrook, was that the name of the place?
yeah, yeah.
They were piss poor.
Mm.
They had less than we had in Dublin. You know, that was the 70s now. They were still had an outside toilet in their house. And they had less than we had. And this is supposed to be the British Empire and all this. The way that they've completely made it's a great trick that the aristocrats of Britain have played is that they've made everyone collectively responsible, even people whose families were down the mines, or for the aristocrats. It's an unbelievable trick they played, and they got away with they're getting away with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even even my dad grew up like without shoes, like in the back streets of Manchester. It was not that long ago.
Yeah.
But the people like Lenny Henry will say, well, everybody is needs to. What was the figure he came out with? It was like $17 trillion or something ridiculous. It was like £1 million each per
Yeah.
white person. Um, and somebody said it's the funniest thing he said since the 1980s.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that would be the funniest thing is at the 1980s. I
I think
think,
we paid enough reparations with all the social welfare we've doled out over the decades. Just gonna
well,
throw that out there.
Mm,
but no, especially Europeans, there's nowhere on earth that people have died in the numbers in wars that have died in Europe. It's just, and many of those people who died were fighting against tyranny and oppression. They may have been at times been on the wrong side or had their own opinions, but no, there was always they weren't fighting necessarily for a god or a king or a religion. They were fighting for the belief that there was something bad in the world that had to be fixed and it could be fixed. And this is never acknowledged. It's never acknowledged that like the people who fought for with Napoleon genuinely believed that he would end the aristocratic reign of Europe and bring in a proper functioning, Europe. They just fought for him because he was a little small French guy, and vice versa. And it's there's again the lack of education, even among so-called educated people today. It just shocks me. It gets me down actually. They live in this infantile world of everything is either black and white, and there's no nuance of any kind. And that's where Lenny Henry gets his mentality from. It permeates every aspect of society. Everyone's a cartoon character.
speaking of cartoon characters, I was just saying this the other day to my wife. I think it was probably in the 80s where things started to become cartoonified, where things that were aimed at not just children anymore, but adults, like in adverts and things like that. So instead of the advert being, a human speaking, it's actually some ridiculous, cartoon hedgehog or fox telling you to change your gas company or whatever. And it is this sort of incessant kind of dumbing down of people over the years, which has led to this situation where people can't grasp things like history or, anything that requires more than a few minutes of concentration. It's
And then
quite
back to,
it's a worrying situation.
and yet back to the beginning, what we were saying is they get vehemently angry about it. How
Mm,
dare you, how dare you interrupt the cartoon view of reality?
hmm
Yes, and an infantilization of people that has never existed, I think, in probably maybe the entire human history, where adult people are mollycoddled like children. And I see this with especially my generation, the so-called millennials. I'm not even sure if I'm technically a so-called geriatric millennial or
mm,
extremely young Gen X. I'm not even sure. I don't care. I
mm,
find these labels silly, but I'm of the Pluto in Libra generation, and I think that is astrologically more sound than some made-up marketing gimmick with millennials and Gen X and Gen this and Gen that. But there is with my generation, I think it's where it really started, and that's where the so-called millennials got this bad rap from, that they're sort of infantile despite being grown up. And today, all this discussion about, oh, your frontal lobe isn't developed until you're 25, and with men, it's supposedly 30. So that was completely unheard of in previous generations. You were a man at, say, 16, 18. We had in the 50s, we had all these songs like Sweet 16, where it was expected of you to go and date. And it was also normal for women to look for men who could provide for an entire family, which entailed the possibility of the man being a bit older than the woman. And today it's, oh no, he groomed her. It's impossible
mm,
to even start a normal discourse of the past without getting labels thrown out, like abuse here and this and that. And oh, that was bad and that was bad. And nobody seems to remember the good things, such as learning how to be a man, or taking responsibility, or as a woman, doing the things that women traditionally do without looking down on them. And everybody is like ultra feminist, but if you're such a feminist, then why do you deny women the choice? Isn't feminism about the choice, whether a woman wants to work or not, for example? Because now it seems that the tables have completely turned, and women have yet again no choice. Before, they did not really have a choice to have a career, and now they don't really have a choice to not have a career if they don't want one. Not every woman wants to be a boss babe. Not everybody wants that. It's not for everyone. Not everybody wants to be a so-called corporate girly, or whatever they call themselves these days. And this also is so infantilizing. Corporate, I'm a corporate girly. No, you're not a girly. You're in your mid-30s. Um,
mm. And you know what? They're like these boss babe types, and I do actually come across quite a few of them in my work. They don't actually produce anything. That's the thing. They're not actually very useful. They're managing, they're producing spreadsheets, they're producing PowerPoint presentations, they're having meetings with one another, flying from one city to another, acting very important. But what I'm seeing, and I don't want to sound sexist with this either, but it tends to be the men doing the actual work, whether it's writing things or making films or designing things. It's quite a strange
Yeah.
situation to be in.
It was like that 20 years ago when I worked in corporate life. Women
Mm,
just, I mean, I hate to say it, but they just basically did meetings.
mm,
And at the time I didn't think twice about it. I didn't think like, the fellas are holding this all together. And they
mm,
weren't, because there was obviously, though I can remember there were quite many competent women that I worked with, but it was almost like there was an assumption by the senior management that when things really need to, and if something serious needs to be done, and a real major decision has to be taken, it's not the one who wears a bra and knickers. It's the fellas, the men who do it, And yeah, it's just a weird thing. It's not they it almost I got the impression, I don't know if it's still like that. I got the impression that all these women as boss babes, you know, in the workplace were just basically filling quotas rather than actually,
Yeah.
unless they owned the company or something like that. They were in the office. They were just basically, you know, this is we have so X amount of women. That's what I felt about it.
Mm. I think women are better at bureaucratic things than men in general. So any sort of expanding organization tends to attract people that are good at like managing that expansion. And I think women tend to be better at that than men, which
Yeah,
is
because
probably why they're sort of able to go into these positions and sort of thrive.
the multitasking
But
aspect.
but
Mm,
if we were truly progressive, then we wouldn't shun the good from the past. We would carry it forward.
mm,
And we would seek an understanding of each other. I mean, when we talk about men and women, we would seek an understanding of each other's strength, uh, respectively, and not try to put each other down all the time, which is the huge bone I have to pick with the feminists, that they have to denigrate men
I
the way they do.
Well, I mean, about that, I think what the feminists hate even more than the patriarchy, the patriarchy is is womanhood. They hate womanhood. I truly believe that
mm,
Yes, and they
because
call
everything
it.
about womanhood, yeah, but yeah, indeed, everything about womanhood is shunned, made fun of. Like, oh no, you've been oppressed your whole life and you didn't even know it, you
mm,
poor woman, girl. Like, no,
Marge Simpson.
yeah.
Yes, and what I find so funny is that they will call a woman a pick me who isn't totally sold on their agenda. Well, they're the biggest pick me's of all because they're the pick me's for other feminists. Their so-called sisters' approval is the only thing they care about. And they will say anything so that the other feminists nod their heads in approval. Oh, yeah, yeah, good girl. Yeah, right. You recited your lines perfectly. And every woman who doesn't agree has internalized misogyny. Like, what? So I can't have I mean, I'm supposed to have my own opinion and be empowered and all, but as soon as I disagree with you, I have internalized misogyny and I'm a pick me, so therefore I cannot actually think for myself. So what does that say about your idea about women?
mm.
Ugh, you know, it's crazy.
You know,
Just
I
crazy.
genuinely don't argue with these people. When somebody says that to me, and it has been said to me that I have internalized misogyny, my answer is pretty straightforward. Yes, sideways, doggy style, reversed cowgirl. That's how I internalize my misogyny.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, that's a bit crude maybe for you two, but it's the only way to deal with these people. I don't take them serious, and they can know that I don't take them serious. I'm not going to listen to you. You're a miserable bitch.
I'm gonna beep that
Okay, I
out.
think I think this.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm traumatized now, Tina. She just wrecked my Madonna-like image of her. Anyway, and I mean the traditional Madonna.
Oh, which Madonna?
Quickly, in the few minutes we have left, I want to bring something Fortean. I was on a music group today, and to my amazement, someone brought up the Mandela effect, and I thought all these people would slag it off and say it was stupid and it wasn't real. Almost everyone on this really long thread said they now believe the Mandela effect is real, that there's definitely something to it. They said I said that the bottom line was most of it was bullshit, but there's things that cannot be explained, like Dolly's braces and Moonraker and the cornucopia on the Fruit of the Loom thing, and a few others they mentioned. And so I found it very interesting that people who would not be inclined to Fortean were suddenly Forteing it up. Very, very matter of factly, I might add.
Yeah, I mean, maybe people are sort of starting to come to terms with the idea that reality is flexible. You can manipulate it, and you know, the past can be changed in a way. And I think it is being changed. It has been changed.
Well, quantum retrocausality, literally changing the past, won the Nobel Prize for Physics 2 years ago.
Mm.
They sent a particle back in time to what it was being in a previous incarnation or whatever we call a particle is. So they showed you could go back and change the past, which then that brings us back to Olivia's foglets and using this fog, this MR, and also the mice with the fMNRA in their brains. Is it being done to us? It would almost like we become the techno-Gnosticism or something if that was true. So we'll wrap up now. Jason, thank you very much, by the way, for coming along and filling in for Fiona and Olivia for running the show, and Tina, you go home and say 10 Hail Marys. But anyway, everyone, Jason, tell us where people can find you. I'll put the link into the pinned comment in the bottom, but your books and so on.
Oh yeah, I've got a blog called beyondthewasteland.co.uk. And then I write on Substack as well. And that's called The Magic Mountain after the Thomas Mann book, which is all about people cracking up before the First World War. Otherwise, yeah, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah, and you've also written one of the greatest articles, I think, in the history of the internet. It was the one about Steiner and and the whole concept of the Ahrimanic egregoric society. That's people really need to read that as well.
Oh,
It's
thank you. Yeah, that's on
phenomenal
my
article.
Beyond the Wasteland blog. It,
Yeah.
it just came to me, that idea. I don't know why, it just came from somewhere. And I got Michael Cox, who we both know.
Yep.
And he's an artist. I said, Michael, we've got to work on this piece of art together about Steiner and what he said about vaccines and demons. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's on there.
A very important article everyone has to read. Maybe Olivia can pin that into the comment section. Okay, so we'll wrap it up now. This is the Ministry for Psychic Weather debriefing, and thanks again everybody for listening, and thanks to the usual gang. And we'll be back soon, somehow, somewhere, and maybe this time Tina will behave herself. Good night, everybody.